There's one question, and it's who's for.
Is there any suspense to you at all?
Yeah. Well, tonight, I assume TCU remains where they've been. I don't think that but here's my question, and this is the thing
that's replacing Mississippi State at 4.
Correct, because Mississippi State obviously lost to Bama. My question / I don't know if I go so far as to label it a concern because it doesn't impact my life, but my question is the Baylor head-to-head. There was this presumption that eventually that head-to-head would matter, and that's if they're both 11-1. Well, there's only one game left. And Baylor's not just one behind, they're 2 behind. They've got Ohio State in the middle. So what does Baylor need to do? Win by 100? You got a concussed quarterback who says yesterday, I've got a headache, but I'm playing. I think protocol for Baylor is this is the biggest football game we've ever played. We'll figure this out. But what do they have to do? And if they only win by, say, 7 or 10, then this head-to-head that we presumed at some point would matter just doesn't?
I think you're making a mistake, though, by acting as if there's this massive gap between Baylor and TCU just because the numbers to the left. That because there's a team in between that their task is even greater to jump up as if it's standings. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what those conversations are like in that room, but I'd imagine the committee has these teams very, very close. And you're right that we've assumed that eventually Baylor, when they play out their 12 and they have the head-to-head, they'll be ahead of TCU. You're the first person I've heard kind of say this, but are you basing on you thinking the committee sees TCU as the better football team despite the head-to-head loss, or just because of the way they're ranked in the numbers?
I'm just really starting to wonder if the committee left this correction, or they left open the door that we can revisit when we get to the end. And the comedy of, you've been talking about this for a couple of months, this commercial.
10 teams, 9 games.
One true champion.
And now the Big 12 says, we're not going to decide a champion. We're not going to name one. If they both finish 11-1, the conference won't even step forward and accept any responsibility. They're just throwing their hands up going, well, that whole thing about one true champion, we got a couple. You guys sort it out amongst yourselves, committee. We can't be bothered to figure that out.
Because they want to.
They'd prefer it.
And I don't blame them for wanting to, but the funny thing is,
it originally,
it absolutely could happen. Alabama loses to Mizzou. Mizzou's not getting into the playoff, nor should they get in. I mean, I'm sorry. You can't lose to Indiana to be playing for a national championship.
I don't know that that's the rule, but you believe that that's probably accurate.
Okay, so Bama could be out. Florida State could be out. I would think Arizona would replace Oregon if they get them a second time. So, yeah, that's the point. Like, as I'm watching stuff this weekend, I'm going, there's a path here that's not completely make-believe for the Big 12 getting 2. But when all of this stuff was building up, say, a month or so ago, Scott, about that one true champion, the thought was the Big 12 was going to, what was the term? I'm trying to think, like recommend a champion?
Yeah, now they're just not even going to, they're abstaining from announcing.
Making it up like every week.
It's unbelievable to me, and I guess I'm just considering that given that Ohio State still sits there, and then there's the Ohio State piece is a separate conversation, but look, if they beat Wisconsin with Jones as their quarterback, what else is there to figure out? Well, I got to see what they do. I'm not really sure what I think. Okay, well, if they beat Wisconsin, is that enough? Or are you still going to hold against them that they don't have J.T. Barrett, their quarterback?
So wait a minute. What if everybody wins out? What if Baylor, TCU, 11-1, Ohio State, 12-1, beat Wisconsin with Cardale Jones, Big Ten champ? What do you do? And that means everybody else is 1-2.
I have said all along, I felt like Ohio State with Barrett was playing their best. If they win this game against Wisconsin, then it's them. For me, it's them or Baylor, because ultimately in sports, the head-to-head has to matter. And I appreciate TCU and Baylor fans because you're the rarest college football fans I've encountered, because I've had the back and forth with you, and you're actually reasonable. TCU fans will never own the fact that if the roles were reversed and you beat them and they tried to hit you with the West Virginia outcome and the fact that they played Minnesota, you'd never accept it. Because ultimately in sports, the fact that head-to-head, however it happened, calls at the end, whatever, they beat you. And if that doesn't matter, ultimately more, then what's the frickin' point? What are we doing with sports? I mean, in the NFL, the first tiebreaker's head-to-head. Nobody's schedule is ever going to be exactly the same. Your conference schedule will be. If they're both 11-1, then the Baylor thing the head-to-head has to matter. Does it not?
I agree with everything you just said regarding Baylor and TCU. I do think that there exists a scenario where, and I was trying to think of one last night, say Oregon lost to Michigan State, and you looked at the Big Ten, you knew it wasn't as good as the Pac-12, and they had a similar record, and there was one spot left, and you felt like Michigan State didn't play in their championship game for the conference, and Oregon won theirs with the extra game, where you could go, all right, you know what, there's a little bit of separation here. I can look at this a little bit differently. It doesn't seem entirely fair, but maybe the head-to-head doesn't matter as much. But it's two teams from the same conference playing the 9 same conference teams. I don't like Stanford Steve. You said it the other day. Like when you get hit with this as a former player, what's your first reaction?
Head to head, who won the game? Get them in.
Or well, I mean, like really,
Why are we playing?
That's
why,
what.
why
That's,
play
that,
the game?
That's it. And the thing, and this is the part with TCU, and I think they've heard us. We like them. We were ahead of the curve on TCU.
You were way ahead of everybody else.
I had them ranked preseason and the teams, and they've moved their way up because I always knew from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we saw Patterson in Dallas, that this young team that he put out there, they were going to be good. This was the year, and they are. They are. And the fact that they lost in a game that they had a huge lead, that's a tough pill to swallow. And there were some ticky-tack calls, one that didn't go for you and one that went against you. I understand all of that. It's reasonable to put all of these things forward. But ultimately, what Steve just said, head-to-head, what's the point otherwise?
Then you could always go ahead, Steve.
I just think too. I mean, my former college coach is on the board. There's Barry Alvarez. There's some old school football guys in there that I know, appreciate, and respect head to head. And I think they're waiting for this game for Baylor to, equal the resume, and head to head will overtake it.
Here's the one thing, though, guys, that those are some old school folks, but there's all we all, as much as we fight it, are influenced by what we've seen most recently. And if Baylor plays against Kansas State and wins, and let's say it's 31-24.
Which is entirely possible because Kansas State is good and tough to play.
Correct. Right. Then that room can say, TCU played them and put it on them. And you'd say, yeah, they did. But then don't you still have to come back to the head-to-head? Because, look, we can do this. Baylor just struggled with Texas Tech. Fine. That works in your favor for TCU. I don't want to hear about the Oklahoma, and they didn't have their best player. You mean their quarterback who played until the fourth quarter? He was playing until the fourth quarter when it was 38-10 or something. Baylor smashed him in Norman. This is the part about the process that I cannot stand, but I understand, and that's that you selectively use the things that prop up your point, and you conveniently ignore the things that don't. That's the least fun part about this. Long time ago, you asked me a question. If Baylor beats Kansas State and they do so convincingly, that has to the head-to-head for me has to trump it.
Doesn't have to be convincing for me. They're both 11-1 with the same. It's the same. It's the same as it can get, essentially head to head. And the Minnesota win does not cancel out losing.
And that would be such a bitter pill to swallow for TCU. But if it were the roles were reversed, that's the thing I keep saying.
I also think Baylor's better.
There's that.
I'll take Bryce Petty every day over Boykin. Watching Boykin in that Texas game, you're like, man.
A lot of jump balls got caught.
And all they do is score 50 points every week, so I'm an idiot. But it doesn't mean I have to like to wait.
We're brought to you by Quicken Loans, engineered to amaze. Jesse Palmer will enter this conversation top of the next hour. Coming up next, 2 questions. We'll show this tonight. We'll find out at 7 who's number 4, and that's really the big question. In TCU Baylor, there's a comparison to be made. You can start with head-to-head. It gets complicated. It gets complex. You've seen TCU in person last week against Texas. How do you separate the two?
I think it's Baylor, and this is what I did. And I agree with you guys. I think it's very complex. There's so many different moving parts you could look at. I think the head-to-head's critical. I think the fact that, Baylor should be the Big 12 champion if they both finish with the same record, considering the head-to-head victory. They should be the one that gets to keep the trophy. But most importantly, guys, I just think Baylor's better. I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning, and I went back and I watched the Baylor versus TCU game because I have no life, and this is important. And I just sat down and tried to watch the tape just objectively. And when I got finished watching the game, I believe, just bottom line, I believe Baylor's a better football team. I think their quarterback's better in that game. They give up a kick return for a touchdown. They throw a pick six. They had 3 turnovers, and they still found a way to score 60 points or whatever it was. And so top to bottom, when I just look at that team, the eye test, as a former football player, when I watch those two teams, in my opinion, Baylor's the better football team.
Jesse, I agree with that sentiment. I'm trying to see the TCU point, but I agree with the head-to-head sentiment. And at the moment, it's not just TCU, it's Ohio State that's ahead of them. So are you of the opinion that if Baylor is able to beat Kansas State and do so handily, that they're going to be able to jump not just Ohio State, but TCU as well?
I think so. And, I mean, that's something that I expect to see reflected in the polls. I think maybe a lot of people in the committee are just waiting to watch that Kansas State game. Obviously, they'll look at the head-to-heads and common opponents between TCU and Baylor. And obviously, TCU handled Kansas State very impressively. So I think it's important that Baylor not just win this game this weekend. I think they have to win it impressively. I think they're also sitting back and they want to watch Ohio State play in a conference title game, with Cardale Jones at quarterback, and they want to see what they look like if, in fact, they get that win, and just how impressive are they. But this is really interesting. I mean, just watching this whole thing kind of unfold, I think there's room for a lot of movement here in the final week. Not just watching those games, but obviously we've got conference championship games that could continue to flip the script as well. It's amazing how this always happens. We always feel like we got everything figured out in the final week of the season, or final couple of weeks, certainly this year included. Chaos happens and it just blows everything up.
Jesse Palmer hanging out with us. You did the Iron Bowl, and looking at that game, Jesse Palmer with us did the Iron Bowl. When you look at Bama defensively, is this just Auburn clicking with Nick Marshall one night? Because statistically, Bama still ranks among the top defenses in the country. I know the game has changed, but did you see anything that was like great cause for alarm with that secondary?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it was the play at cornerback. Certainly Nick Marshall was really accurate throwing the ball deep. We saw Sammy Coates and Duke Williams and Quan Bray and a bunch of guys run down the field and make plays. But, I really thought up until that game in the second half of the season, Alabama was playing the best total D in the country because they had marked improvement at corner. It was an Achilles heel last year. It was a big reason why they lost the Ole Miss game earlier this season. But Eddie Jackson getting back from his ACL injury was big, and then you had Cyrus Jones that was playing very well, and all of a sudden in that game, they got taken advantage of. That's a cause for concern, even if you just look in the SEC title game, because Bud Sasser is a very underrated wide receiver for Missouri. Missouri's back to full strength of wide receiver. Darius White's now back on the field, so they have 2 legitimate threats outside that can make plays. Beyond that, if Alabama, say, got paired up with a TCU or a Baylor in the first round of the college football playoff, I mean, that's a problem, considering the receivers, both of those teams come out of the Big 12. So absolutely there's cause for concern right now if you're Alabama, because the cornerback play has not been great. It's not just the Auburn game, guys. They gave up some big throws down the sidelines against Western Carolina 2 weeks ago. So, yes, to answer your question, it's an issue right now if you're Alabama.
Maybe more alarming, before the Florida State-Florida game, Danny Cannell, who loves just messing with every single one of us, tweeted out a picture of one of the Gators-Seminoles matchups where I think you might have been redshirting. I'm not sure, but there was a little bit of a melee, a little trash talk between the Gators and Seminoles, and you're in the background with the Palmer jersey and some jeans. They're a little baggy, but, hey, it's, late 90s, early 2000s. We all had pleated jeans. Have you seen the photo? Because, Cannell's just killing you with it.
No. Okay, a couple things. Firstly, those were very baggy jeans. But I was also squatting the house back then.
Oh, I apologize.
Secondly, I was not redshirting. I had a broken clavicle. So I was in street attire. Florida State's just lucky I couldn't make it to the front of the pile. Had I had 2 clavicles, that whole thing gets blown up.
Who knows if they even play it?
And that was one of those things. I think every year we played Florida State, I think we had a fight before the game somewhere in the middle of the field. I think right as that picture was being taken, I think our starting cornerback Tony George was punching somebody. He gets kicked out. Peter Warrick, the golden child, gets to match up against like a true freshman corner for us. It ended up not ending well, obviously, for us that day. But, I certainly remember the photo. I get reminded about that photo every year around this time of the season. So it's not just Danny Cannell. The jeans were not pleated, but they were faded.
They were nice.
To make that clear.
Right.
Yeah, they weren't expensive.
Do you still have them?
No, because I've lost weight now, and I don't squat like I used to.
Jesse
I'm more of a leg press guy these days.
Jesse Palmer is our guest. You work on Thursdays with one of my favorite people here, Reese Davis. He's as classy a guy as there is in our business. And you also get to work with a true legend in